Okay, at the risk of becoming monotone and very cheap production values, I have the components for my video here. I'm actually in the middle of a move, so please excuse the low production value. Having to use my cell phone. My craft is soldering with an iron. This is your typical iron you get at Radio Shack, Zippity Zap, with the flux there. And you take your solder, this is fresh solder, that comes on a spool. It's kind of like miniature welding, if you will, for those of you not familiar with it. Although, if you are familiar with it, I'm sure you would tell me that there are differences, and there are, I just can't get into during this video. Alright, so the basic idea is this is a PCB, which means printed circuit board, which has a bunch of holes and lines that are called traces. Traces send electrical signals from one component to the next. The board is here just to keep everything in place, really, and so the signals can be sent. Most components here are locked solid. Eventually, once in a while, one of these components, a chip like this one, may fail, and you need to replace it. Desoldering is it's a related craft, but slightly different, and so I really just wanted to focus on soldering, because that's the big one. So a chip like this, right here, contains information for whatever, and you want to put it on here. Guess what? The PCB board has holes, so you can stick it right in there. But it won't fit tight. You need to do something to make it tight, which is where the solder comes in. So I'm going to do this one-handed. You'd basically take your solder, put it on your hole. After your iron's nice and hot, don't touch the metal part, touch the plastic part. That's why they make it, folks. Alright, and then you just literally touch the solder and allow it to drip on the component holes, sometimes referred to as the legs, depending on what you're doing. Same thing can be done with wires. You get wires like this, you strip them off, and you just put two wires together, drip a little solder, and you'll have a connection, usually very tight. These items here are to help the solder stick better. A wetted pad to kind of get rid of excess solder and gunk. Want to kind of go over some of the questions real quick. The basic thing is, the craft here, let me put it this way, why I chose this craft is I thought about my grandfather, and he loved hobby stuff. Unfortunately, when he needed an occupational therapist, they were really plugging knitting for him, for the fine motor. And as a kid, in the 80s, I saw him very, very resistant to it because it wasn't masculine. Honestly, sewing, even on the plastic printed printouts, I mean, he could do it, but he was doing a craft that was not meaningful to him. These are printed circuit boards bigger, and I'll explain these in a second. Just want to give you a different view. But my grandfather didn't like that. He didn't want to sew a kitten or make a Kleenex box out of yarn. It just didn't appeal to him. The other reason why I chose this was because I love arcade games. And when I first heard I was getting into school, I had just started to want to learn how to repair my games, and this was the perfect opportunity to do so. So that's why I chose it, because it was something when I read the assignment, I'm like, I need to choose a craft. And with occupational therapy, the first thing I thought of was sewing something. And again, for myself, I thought that doesn't sound very appealing. And I wanted to find something meaningful. That's kind of what we're supposed to do, right? So there is meaning in sewing and crafting, don't get me wrong, but I hate to say it, there's a lot of people like my grandfather out there still, and I thought, as an occupational therapist, wouldn't it be cool to bring, or an OTA, wouldn't it be cool to bring something to somebody that they might actually enjoy that's a little bit different? Okay, so that's kind of how I chose it. I would say my experience of learning this was it was difficult. This pin is the core of everything, or this iron is the core of everything. And what I found difficult, and it was difficult, was the fact that I had to learn how to hold the pen steady. As you can see, I'm not doing a very good job right now because I'm on camera. But learning how to hold it steady and then going to those specific spots that I needed to. and then testing the results, of course. And once you test the results and you get what you thought you would, such as a live circuit, you know you did good or bad if it failed. So the two challenging steps for me were really holding the pen, I would say. And the other one was figuring out what to do with my other hand. Sometimes I'd hold this thing. Sometimes I'd hold whatever component I was using, or the solder. Usually you're holding the solder. There are things like helping hands, and I'll get into that later, but learning how to do wiring to components. This was just an old transformer I found at a junkyard and I decided to practice on. So, what else do I really want to get? This project means a lot to me. It means two things. It means I am in the arcade world. I'm into the old video game scene, and what it means to me is that I feel stronger in the hobby, and I'll get to that in more detail later. But it's also an homage, kind of a gift, if you will, to my grandfather. If he were alive today, I would have loved to sit down with him and work on this occupation. I would pay him to do it at this point, or charge his Medicaid. Haha. Bad joke, I know. So, to me, it was really meaningful because it means I can now talk. It's the lingo of some of the arcade guys that I couldn't before. Again, it's part of my social background. A lot of people my age in their late 30s to early 50s grew up with games like Pac-Man, Mario, Space Invaders, etc. So it really allows me to connect. And what's really cool is I can connect to people in a different way that maybe they didn't think. A lot of people can play the game, but can they repair the game? Can they fix it? Can they enhance it? I've talked to different people online and in person, different cultures since then. One guy is Islamic, another guy is from Hawaii, Japan, England, I mean, you name it. So to me, that's really cool because it goes across cultural boundaries. The next question, I'm going to read it off. What ideas do you have about the type of client and activities this could benefit? To me, that's a hot one. That's my grandfather again. If I could go back in time, I would find his OT and OTA and slap them upside the head because they were not doing a meaningful occupation for him. I remember they were having him sew, back in the 80s for you younger folk, the Kleenex boxes. For some reason, old ladies loved having a quilted or sewn covers for those boxes, and I remember that he was doing some, and he hated it. So for me, this is really good for those manly men who might not have the same cultural open attitude as a lot of us. This would appear more masculine and might grab another audience, and again, it does a lot of the same fine motor tuning that some of the other crafts and hobbies do. I could grade this up or down by a couple of things. By using a desoldering gun and having components already removed, so that way my client can simply just attach. This one really doesn't go here, but to attach components on, and so they could feel good. Hey, look what I did. I got that chip on. I could also in a sense, downgrade it, making it easier by having these large circuit boards. In fact, I was going to try this with one of my clients at work. I don't really work in this field. I work in a different field. But we were going to try to do some soldering on some old VCR components. This here is an arcade board. Likewise, you could upgrade it by using much more sophisticated or newer circuit boards. Like this is considered archaic. This is from the 90s. This piece alone, or just all of what you see here, could be easily contained on an SD card without even breaking a sweat. So finding like a DVD player, we could go down to the thrift store and be able to work on it that way. And just find a smaller component. And then also another way to grade up would be using a much hotter iron, because what happens is the heat gets transferred to all these traces and all the components. And you're usually working on the back side. And so when the heat gets dispersed, the metal doesn't really get gooey like you wanna. So sometimes you have to use a stronger iron. But my gosh, again, I'm really excited about this. I know this isn't the greatest quality video, but hey, Here it is, a soldering iron. To me, it was just so simple yet brilliant for my assignment, and I'm really thankful that I jumped into it. Alrighty, and I'll be able to answer questions and comments when we're allowed to do so. Thanks. Bye.